Russian forces continued offensive operations near Soledar, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and Donetsk City. On the Sloboda front, a recent footage shows Ukrainian troops at the eastern edge of Novoselivsk. The settlement is ruined, but it seems Ukrainians control of what's left. Siversky Donetsk Russian forces attacked Ukrainian positions near Bilohorivka, Verkno-Kamiansk, Spern and Bilohorivka. Neither attack was successful. Now on the Bakhmut front there are several updates. Wagner mercenaries entered Sil and captured the train station. The urban area is now under Russian control. The enemy attempted to use the newly gained positions at Sil to advance towards Krasnopolivka. The attempt wasn't successful. Russian troops reportedly entered the outskirts of Klishchivka, but given Ukrainian fortified positions on the high ground nearby, it's not a big deal if true. Ukrainian defenders repelled Russian attacks in the area of Maersk and Pivnikn. In Bakhmut city, fighting continues on the northeastern, eastern and southeastern outskirts. At the Avdiivka front, the enemy, again, tried to break through Ukrainian lines in the vicinity of Krasnohorivka and Kamyanka. As usual, Russian forces failed to do so here. Russian troops assaulted Ukrainian positions near Vodiane, but the attack was repelled. A Russian recon element probed Ukrainian positions near Nevelsk, but the soldiers of 59th Motorized Brigade repulsed the attempt. Donetsk front. A complicated situation is reported from Marinka, where the enemy continues to advance by a few meters every day. Ukrainian forces repelled Russian attacks towards Pobieda, Novomykhailivka, Prikostivka, and Velika Novosilka. Russian army seems to be looking for a weak spot in this area for potential upcoming offensive operation. Zaporizhia front. No change on the ground during the past 48 hours. Kalinchak front. No change on the ground during the past 48 hours. Starting with the Ministry of Defense report of Ukraine. Losses if the Russian occupiers in Ukraine from February 24, 2022 to January 18, 2023. Secretary Antony Blinken announced on Twitter an additional $125 million in funding to support Ukraine's energy and electric grid against Russia's attacks, designed to leave millions without power during the winter months. These attacks have made Ukrainians only even more determined to persevere. Germany won't allow allies to ship German-made tanks to Ukraine to help its defense against Russia, nor send its own systems unless the U.S. agrees to send American-made battle tanks, senior German officials said on Wednesday, writes Wall Street Journal. National Police Chief Ihor Klimenko, appointed as temporary acting Minister of Interior PM Shmihal this morning, Ukraine's Interior Minister Denis Monastyrsky and his deputy Yevgeny Yenin were killed in a helicopter crash near Kyiv that took the lives of 14 people. A video appears of the first minutes after the tragic helicopter crash near Kyiv, which took the lives of 14 people, including the leadership of Ukraine's Interior Ministry. Sergei Lavrov said one day the war will be over, but how to live after that I don't know yet. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov augmented these efforts to increase Russian support for a protracted war by explicitly claiming that Ukraine and the West are pursuing the genocide of the Russian people. Lavrov's equations of the West with Nazi Germany and its support for Ukraine with an effort to exterminate the Russian people are ludicrous and almost certainly aimed at a domestic Russian audience. Ukraine has never threatened to invade or seize territory beyond the internationally recognized borders of 1991. Neither NATO as an alliance nor any individual member state has threatened to invade Russia, let alone to pursue the destruction of Russians as a people. The purpose of Lavrov's outrageous and absurd comparison was very likely meant to complement Putin's rhetoric and other Russian efforts to persuade the Russian people that Ukraine and its Western backers pose a real and imminent threat to Russian territory and to the Russian people in their homes. Putin and Lavrov continue to deny Ukrainian sovereignty and outright reject direct negotiations with Ukraine. Serbia asks Russia to end recruitment of its people for Ukraine war. Serbian president criticized Russia's sites and social media for publishing advertisements in the Serbian language to volunteer to join its ranks. Russia should halt its efforts to recruit Serbs to fight alongside its Wagner paramilitary group in Ukraine, Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić said. Why do the Russians need so many foreign fighters? With a population of over 145 million citizens, you'd think they could resource their own soldiers. Or, do they simply want others to lose their lives so Russians don't have to? Vučić criticized Russia's websites and social media groups for publishing advertisements in the Serbian language in which the Wagner Group calls volunteers to join its ranks. Why do you, from Wagner, call anyone from Serbia when you know that it is against our regulations? Vučić said late on Monday in a broadcast by the Belgrade-based Happy TV. Although it repeatedly condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine at the United Nations and several other international forums, Belgrade has also refused to impose sanctions against Moscow. Serbia is entirely dependent on gas imports from Russia, and its NIS oil retailer is owned by Russia's Gazprom. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu announced that he will implement Russian President Vladimir Putin's directive to conduct large-scale military reforms between 2023 to 2026 to expand Russia's conventional armed forces, likely in preparation for a protracted war in Ukraine, and also to set conditions to build a significantly stronger Russian military quickly. Shoigu stated that Putin ordered Russian authorities to increase the number of Russian military personnel to 1.5 million, from the current 1.35 million. The Russian Ministry of Defense is trying to improve professionalism within the Russian armed forces and likely test and improve the effectiveness of its chains of command down to the small unit level. Several MIL bloggers commented on a reported list of guidelines for Russian troops in Ukraine that restricts the use of personal vehicles and certain personal electronic devices in the combat zone and sets stricter guidelines for the grooming standards of men on the front lines. Wagner Group financier Yevgeny Prigozhin is becoming increasingly bold in his verbal attacks against the Russian Ministry of Defense. Prigozhin criticized the MOD's new guidelines for Russian troops in Ukraine that restrict the use of certain personal electronic devices in combat zones and set stricter guidelines for men's grooming standards on January 18. Prigozhin defended Russian line soldiers who do not adhere to grooming standards. Prigozhin directly attacked Russian President Vladimir Putin's presidential administration and insinuated that some officials working there are traitors who want Russia to lose the war in Ukraine, one of Prigozhin's boldest attacks against the Kremlin to date. Prigozhin and other notable voices in Russia are carving out a new space to criticize Russian President Vladimir Putin without fear of retribution. Prigozhin and other prominent Russian nationalists such as Igor Girkin, a former Russian militant commander and prominent critical voice in the Russian milblogger information space, have been opening a new sector in the Russian information space where certain figures can criticize Putin and the highest echelons of the Russian government without any apparent retribution. Igor Girkin heavily implied that he would support the removal of Russian President Vladimir Putin from office in his most direct criticism of Putin to date on January 10, for example. Putin has decided to not censor these voices for far. If you want to stay ahead with news, updates and exclusive military footage from Ukraine, make sure to support us on our Patreon page with the link below. Thank you very much for your support.